Well, welcome everyone to IPS's Mandate for Change election series. And I'm especially pleased to welcome you today on a day when we're still all basking in the glory of promises of a new era, at least a transformational moment for us now, and something that I think most of the country and the world is celebrating at some level. So welcome so much. And a little housekeeping before we start. This is the fifth in a series of 8 that IPS is holding on the election and a new administration and challenges and policies for a new administration. This one and the previous 4 are available as video and audio stream on our website, which is www.ips-dc.org. So I urge you to check out the other panels if you haven't already. This one will be up soon, and the future panels will be as well. The one today focuses on post-election analysis. And next week, November 11th, we'll focus on the issue of climate change and climate action. And there is a full listing on one of the handouts by the door. And these all contain some number of the authors that have contributed to our upcoming book, Mandate for Change. And there is also a flyer for this book that will be released near the first of the year. And our series will address some of those policy challenges and lead up to the release of the book. So, again, watch our website for developments there. Before we get into the question of policy and of challenges that we all face and what may be not as hopeful as we're feeling right now, I just want to grab the moment to again bask in the hope that we are feeling and to express some sentiment, because I think that most of us right now are feeling something different than we've ever felt in the wake of a previous presidential election. And I'm speaking not as a partisan, nor even as a member of IPS, but as a mother, as a woman, as a resident of this country, as a resident of the world, really, that I feel very different. I feel changed somehow. I think that President-elect Barack Hussein Obama has revealed to our country and to the world that what it means to be a United States American is something much different today, November 6th, 2008, than it was on Monday, November 3rd, 2008. Though it was the struggle and the blood of generations before him that really achieved that redefinition, it's remained largely hidden until he revealed it with his victory Tuesday night. The new U.S. American is black. The new U.S. American is mixed race. The new U.S. American has a Muslim name. The new American is raised by a single mother. The new American is brilliant and vibrant and decent and grassroots and internationalist and beautiful. And the new U.S. American, I think, inspires us all. And I contend that an Obama presidency, for whatever challenges it may hold, whatever disappointments we may feel, it does make us all better U.S. Americans. And the promises of an Obama administration are great. They range from ending the war in Iraq, kudos to Code Pink in the front row, to closing Guantanamo Bay, to achieving universal health care and reversing racial and economic inequality. And Obama has achieved such a decisive victory that there is a clear mandate for progressive change. Obama's progressive credentials may be less clear. And our panelists will enlighten us on the possibilities of realizing these promises. But one last thing before we turn to them. I do feel compelled to highlight at least one egregious assault on civil liberties that took place with this election. The constitutional civil right of women and men to marry whomever they freely choose was ripped from the citizens of California and from us all by the hate and ignorant-based California Proposition 8 banning gay marriage. Similar marriages I wish similar marriages existed. Similar measures exist in other states, and Arizona and Florida passed another similar ballot measures. But in California, an existing constitutional civil right was taken away, and that continues the status of separate but equal with regard to sexual orientation, and that diminishes us all. And affirmative action was successfully banned in ballot initiative in Nebraska and may be so in Colorado. So as we rightfully and righteously celebrate the first African American president, let's not be lulled into the notion that the struggle for civil rights, be they racial, ethnic, age, disability, LGBT, has been won. We took a huge step forward as a nation, and we deserve to celebrate that. We need to celebrate that. But we remain far from the goal of equality. So on that somber note, I now turn to our panelists for a little more hope. And we will hear about the challenges of a new administration, a new Congress, and challenges that we as progressives on the ground face in realizing some of these promises. So first we have John Cavanagh. And John has been the director of IPS since 1998. In this capacity, he oversees programs, outreach, and organizational development. John has a BA from Dartmouth College and an MA from Princeton University. He worked as an international economist for the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, the World Health Organization, and he directs IPS's Global Economy Project. He directed it from 1983 to 1997. He is the co-author of 10 books, numerous articles on the global economy. He and his partner, Robin Broad, recently published a book, Development Redefined, How the Market Met Its Match. Thank you, John.
Thank you very much. Okay. It's great to be here with you all. I'm going to start with the really big issue, and I've been having a big debate in my family over this, which is what happens to Levi. You've forgotten Levi, but Levi's the boyfriend of Bristol, who is the daughter of Sarah Palin. He was the guy who did not want to be a father or a husband. And one of my brothers has bet me $20 that they're going to get married by Christmas. And his reasoning is that People magazine's already offered them $1 million for the pictures from their wedding. And I don't think so. I don't think he's going for it. I think he's out of there. My favorite subject of an email in the last 48 hours was this one. This was from Ralph Nader sending a note to his supporters Tuesday evening. The title was Nader Wins Election. And it referred to a poll of high schoolers in the Berkeley Carroll School in New York City. But that was the title. What I want to focus on, I think Steve is going to tell you a little bit more about exactly what happened in the last 2 days ago. Exactly what happened, because that's what he knows. Bill Fletcher, who boldly came out with the statement, Progressives for Obama, with our board member Barbara Ehrenreich and others, is going to do something a little bit different. I mainly want to talk about how we think about our agenda. But I will just say a couple of things about that were interesting that happened on Tuesday, just randomly. One is there were 4 big groupings that voted over 60% for Obama. You've heard these numbers, but just to repeat them because they're interesting. African Americans, 96% who voted for Obama. Latino, 67%. And keep in mind that the numbers of Latinos who voted for Kerry went down below 55%, so 67. Young people are defined, I love the way young people are defined. This is 18 to 29. They voted 66% for Obama. And union workers, which Obama had been worried would be one of his bigger challenges, voted 60% for Obama. The people who voted for McCain were older people, and I'm also very interested how they define that. That's people over 65. So that's not yet me. They were overwhelmingly for McCain. I mean, not so overwhelmingly, actually. They were 53 to 45. And white men. So, inasmuch as the future of this country, and I think Karen was implying this, is the younger people, and blacks and Latinos, and if we can get the Employee Free Choice Act past union members, this says something very different from what Karl Rove said 4 years ago, which is we are beginning an age of a permanent Republican majority. It's stunning to think that he said that and was not laughed out of the room 4 years ago, but how different that is. In terms of, I think Steve will say more about the Senate, but let me just say something here because it's important in terms of how we think about our battles. I want to talk about our 4 biggest battles, I think, as progressives, but what Steve and others always remind us is that even as we face the big battles over the war, over health care, over the economy, and over the environment, that there are a lot of medium-sized and smaller battles that we can fight. And keep in mind that in the last Congress, getting a voting member of Congress for Washington, D.C. went down by 3 votes in the Senate. The Employee Free Choice Act was basically 3 votes away from passing. That's the one that will make it much easier for people to form unions. So when Democrats go to picking up 5 seats in the Senate, that is huge for a number of very important medium-sized battles that we have. Those are winnable battles now. I mean, I know it's modest to say that Washington, D.C. should have at least have a voting member of the House of Representatives. It's like 1/10 of what we want for D.C. That now just became possible, not just with Barack Obama, but with 5 new senators. We may get 6 new Democratic senators. The one that's within 500 votes is the Al Franken one in Minnesota. It was a lot of fun for some of us. One of the close friends of many of you in this room and the fights around fair trade in the 1990s was Mark Ritchie. He's now the Secretary of State of Minnesota, and it's his day now. He's the big recount is in Minnesota, and Mark is running it. So he's very happy. He doesn't, I mean, privately, Sarah Anderson, who's here, who's been in Minnesota, thinks that it's probably not going to change, but there's a chance of that. I was saying to folks here, I mean, I love this country where a convicted felon got elected to the Senate in Alaska. That was a surprise to me. And I wanted to ask the question, and some of you may know the answer, is whether he was allowed to vote for himself as a convicted felon. In some states you can't. You may know the answer.
I just know that New Jersey and Louisiana are really happy that Alaska's stolen the most corrupt state title away.
Right. And I'm very sad that someone who I personally know and thought was going to win, Jeff Merkley, who's a progressive in Oregon, it looks like didn't quite make it in Oregon. They're still not calling Oregon and Alaska and Minnesota, but alas, the Republican leads in all 3.
Did you look today?
Including Minnesota?
I think
Minnesota, yeah.
Merkley was ahead today.
Oh, well, then there you go. Okay. That would be wonderful.
The difference in Minnesota.
In Minnesota is 500, but they're no
And
longer.
there are a bunch of provisional ballots not in yet.
Yeah. Okay. So it could be we get 6 instead of 5. Now, Bill Gould, who is the wonderful director of the Congressional Progressive Caucus, is now here with us, and he is predicting that of the new members of the House, and the new members of the House, it's somewhere between 29 and 32. What is the number that you are saying of new members of the House?
25, range 25 to 30.
Okay. Bill is saying that 11 of those will join the Congressional Progressive Caucus. Not just Bill, but his co-chairs, Lynn Woolsey and Barbara Lee, released a statement yesterday that predicted that. That would push the caucus from 73 to 84. That's an interesting number because Democrats now can waste. I mean, Nancy Pelosi can win votes in the House while still having 40 Democrats abandon her because she's got now 259 Democrats in the House. You only need 218 to win a vote. So the question of whether the Congressional Progressive Caucus could be a power bloc is very, very interesting. And in the conversation, we should talk more about it. Okay, now, just a few words on these 4 big fights that I think we need to be smart about how we fight. As Karen mentioned, IPS has putting out a book in a month called Mandate for Change, and it has essays from many of you and from Bill Fletcher and others, and it tries to lay out an argument for a different America and a different agenda. And part of it, and this is part of our interpretation of what happened on Tuesday, is it's not just all the wonderful things that Karen just said. It was a rejection of 2 big ideological frames that Republicans have been pushing for 30 years. On the economy, the neoliberal, market fundamentalist Washington consensus that markets can solve most problems, that's gone. And the neoconservative notion that the U.S., through reckless unilateralism, can create democracy around the world and be a force for good, that's gone. So part of what's going on, and it's, I think, important just to say a word about that. That's part of our bigger job as progressives, is to end those eras and replace them with new frames and new arguments about the role of government, about the role of civil society, that replace, I think those two ideologies are failed, but what replaces them is not yet certain. And there will be a fight even within the Democratic Party about what replaces them. In terms of the role in the world, you'll have what Mark Raskin calls the prudent imperialists. People like John Kerry. They still want the U.S. all over the world, but they want to do it prudently and multilaterally. And then others of us who say, no, the U.S. should stop being a global cop and should pull back. We don't need 1,000 bases around the world. We don't need any bases around the world. That's a big debate. And on the economic side, in terms of replacing market fundamentalism and neoliberalism, it's sort of responsible capitalism. That's a lot of what, say, Robert Rubin and Larry Summers would be pushing. Some new regulations, versus a very different notion of the economy, that is bottom-up, that's democratic, that's green, and that has global relations with others. So that's the big picture. Now, we're going to have, I think, 4 giant fights. And our job is to do what the left did under Roosevelt's administration. It is to pull the debate in our direction. The big fights, I think, of the next year are the economy, poverty/inequality, war and peace, and healthcare. And so just a word on each. On the economy, already we're going to have a big fight in a week and a half. There will be a debate over a stimulus package in the Congress. Most progressive economists and even not so progressive economists think it needs to be big, that we've already done most of the things you can do to get an economy going. We now need a fiscal stimulus. Most of them are saying it should be 300 to 400 billion, and Nancy Pelosi seems to now, from the latest I'm hearing, have settled around 150 billion, and Obama's talking about 125 billion. So we're about to have not quite what I was hoping we would have in 2 weeks, but we'll have a big debate about the future of the economy. And I think for progressives, so that's quick. That's not even January 20th. That's in a week and a half. We really need to pull together. Different people here have been part of coalitions that are pushing for a bigger stimulus, for a greener stimulus. I am feeling, and this is a challenge in our progressive ranks, the lack of harmony between our greener wing and our bluer wing being more labor and so on. We don't have a big, robust coalition behind a giant green stimulus that would transform this economy by creating, green cities, make Joe the plumber, Joe the green plumber, and green transit and so on. We don't. And much of the stimulus I think you'll see put forward in a week and a half will be more blue than green. It'll have some green rhetoric, but the green should be the bigger picture on which it's all written, and I don't think we're quite there yet. But it's not going to be as big as we hoped, and this will be a recurring battle. So that's one. I'll just say privately, one of the things I'm loving about this period is, since this crisis is global, I mean, it's hurting all of us. It's hurting all of you. It's hurting all of us. It's hurting us as nonprofits, but it's global. It is bringing back. I've been spending a lot of my time on phone calls. It's 7 in the morning here, and it's 8 p.m. in Manila, with people all around the world who are coming together, and there will be actions around the world on November 15th around the financial summit that George Bush is holding. This will revive the Seattle coalition globally of groups fighting for global justice, and that's very positive. So that's the economy. Inequality and poverty. Obama made a big deal out of poverty being a key problem that needs to be fixed. There's a coalition of more centrist groups called Half in 10, cutting poverty in half in 10 years. The challenge I would throw, and that I think we at IPS throw out to all of us doing that work, is can't we make inequality the center of this, not just poverty? In other words, can't the goal be bringing the top down as well as bringing the bottom up? Barack Obama opened the door to this. His tax plan raises taxes a bit on the richest 5%. and lowers it on all the other 95%. But it is so small and so modest. When he opens up that conversation, can't we jump in with a big, massive redistribution of wealth from the very rich to the poor? And can we build a coalition to make that happen? Again, there will be huge fight back. Lots of forces allayed against that, corporate forces and so on. But that's the second one. Third one, war and peace. And here, there's a lot of people here who are thinking about this. But I think our goals, I don't know, I mean, let's talk about it, are to end the Iraq war more quickly, to be very vocal on Afghanistan and try to end that war. And 3, to cut military spending as part of a new national security frame in a country where there won't be that much money, so that we can offer money from the military. So those are each big tasks. I mean, the last one, let me just say one more word on cutting military spending as part of a new just security frame. We put out a report from IPS, and some of you contributed to it, called Just Security last year. It argues you could cut military spending by $250 billion by doing 3 things: ending the Iraq war, cutting a third of our bases overseas, and getting rid of 12 obsolete weapons systems. Can't we do this now? And offer $250 billion for the green stimulus or the health care plan. And in particular, I know the hardest part is cutting obsolete weapons systems because they're in districts of members of Congress. That's hard, but if we package it with a green stimulus, can't we do that? The one that should be easiest in terms of the politics is cutting the military bases. There's no domestic constituency for that. There are no factories that make military bases in Ecuador. And so next year, Ecuador is going to kick us out. Can we be ready to say, oh my gosh, the world didn't fall apart? Wow, they kicked us out. We're still safe and secure here at home. Let's get rid of the next third, and you can save a lot of money. And already the peace movement is using the economic argument in addition to its moral argument about ending the Iraq war and not shifting those troops to Afghanistan. Finally, on health care, I think there's the feeling in the Democratic Party circles that that's the first big fight that Obama has to win. And I think there's going to be heavy pressure on progressives to compromise a bunch and just let Obama get a win. So just to say that. And I think, Bill can say more about it. His members of Congress are feeling this. And I can understand from an inside the Beltway thing, okay, he needs a win. And it's going to be hard for him even to get a win in a context where everybody's saying there's no money. So I think our job in each of these 4 is to pull the debate further to the left than it would be, and that we can come up with what better than what Obama is going to be put forward, but only if we are more unified than we usually are, only if we build new coalitions that we usually don't, coalitions across race, across class, across the silos of labor, environment, women, blah, 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 that divide us. And I think there's a real willingness here, I know in my organization and all the organizations, and it's wonderful to see so many of you here from those organizations that I'm talking to, that we're going to have to work differently for that to work. A clever combination of inside strategy and outside strategy, working with our allies in the Congressional Progressive Caucus and people on the street. And through that, we can, 1, move some of these bigger debates further to the left, and then win some of the medium-sized debates that are huge, like the Employee Free Choice Act.
Thank you, John. Thank you very much. I want to just note also that the Congressional Progressive Caucus is not a partisan body. It's open to all parties, as are any folks on the side of the progressive debate, that the conversation is not of a partisan nature, but of progressive tendencies. And I should have sort of done this housekeeping before we began, but we'll be about 10 minutes per panelist, and then we'll have some time for panelists to clarify and question each other for a few minutes, give closing statements, and then open it up for a nice long discussion on the floor. So our next panelist, I'm very pleased to call a colleague and friend, Steve Cobble. He grew up in New Mexico politics. He was elected a National Convention delegate for McGovern at age 20. And since then, he's worked on campaigns at every level, from state representative on up. In particular, Steve has worked on campaigns for African American candidates for president, U.S. Senate, and Congress. He's worked on campaigns for Latino candidates, including races for governor, Congress, and mayor. Steve served as the political director of the National Rainbow Coalition, and in 1991 had the honor of conducting GOTV trainings for the African National Congress organizers in South Africa. He was also a fellow at the Institute for Politics at Harvard's Kennedy School and a founder of Progressive Democrats for America, and Steve is an associate fellow here at the Institute for Policy Studies. Welcome, Steve.
Thank you, Karen. I want to start by just letting you know that I'm kind of in the mood to not focus on the disappointments to come. I kind of have the shoulder flick attitude about it today. I think we should take a moment and savor something you may not feel again the rest of your life. And I say that not just because it's a great day, but because historically that's true. The last time the Democrats had back-to-back years as good as 2006 and 2008 was the Great Depression and Franklin Roosevelt. So unless you're really, really old, you haven't been through this and may not be again. And of course, even then, that was white guys, so this is different in character as well. I want to thank the rest of the world for giving us another chance. We avoided the 3 strikes and you're out label yesterday, and we get to try again. Apparently, the voters did not need a weatherman to know which way the wind blew. And I think I'd be remiss if I didn't thank our arch foes, George W. Bush and Karl Rove. Some of you heard me say this the other night. It's such a good line, I have to steal it again. As Chris Rock said, they screwed things up so bad that even a white guy couldn't get elected president. And I think there's a lot of truth to that. But what I really want to talk about today is I want to be happy about the things that happened that our fathers and mothers and grandfathers and grandmothers made possible as progressives. Because the stuff that we're going to fight for in the years to come probably isn't going to do us that much good. Because there's going to be compromises and frustrations, blah, blah, blah. You all know the story. You're on the left, right? You're the left part of the new center-left America that the punditocracy is trying to erase today and call it center-right. We'll start with the Voting Rights Act. We just had an expanded electorate yesterday that voted over 19-to-1 African Americans for Barack Obama. The Voting Rights Act was won on the bridge at Selma. And Dr. King said in his speech, the confrontation of good and evil compressed in the tiny community of Selma generated the massive power to turn the whole nation to a new course. Let us march on ballot boxes until brotherhood becomes more than a meaningless word in an opening prayer. And then, of course, he said, how long? Not long, because the arc of the moral universe is long, but it bends toward justice. And indeed it does bend towards justice. We can be proud yesterday that in a country where 4 of the first 6 presidents were Virginia slave owners, which later became the home of the Confederacy, and we not only elected an African-American guy, we carried Virginia. Miracle of miracles. I mean, you know, the wheel turns. We put an exclamation point ending on the Reagan-Bush era. You know, we didn't put a stake in their heart. They'll come back. They'll get up off the ground and, you know, like vampires, and they'll come back again. But the Katrina survivors got a measure of revenge yesterday. Justice, we'll call it, not revenge. And their ideology is in big trouble right now, which is why they're semi-nationalizing banks. The fact is, you know, it's easy to live through this and not realize this is the biggest back-to-back electoral success that we've had since the Great Depression. Because we, you know, always hope for more, and we, you know, we're frustrated by the way the Democrats behave. But, you know, if this happens once every 75 years, this is pretty big stuff. And that's what just happened on Tuesday. We can take pride not only in the massive African American vote, we can take great pride in the young people. And who expanded the vote for young people? our progressive forefathers and foremothers. Who fought for the rights of Latinos to vote? Who, like young people, voted 2-to-1, more than 2-to-1, for Barack Obama? And that, of course, was after every pundit in Washington said that Latinos would never vote for blacks, which had to be the dumbest statement ever uttered on television by anyone who had ever met a mayor of a big city in America. None of whom were, no Democrat mayor in this country probably, or I probably shouldn't say no, but hardly any was not elected with the votes of both African Americans and Latinos. Latinos also rejected the anti-immigrant policies of fear. They fought back. They did their own march. They rejected the Republican Party. And frankly, the combination of huge youth vote for the Democrats and huge Latino vote for the Democrats is a long-term scary signal for the Republican Party, of which I am very happy, because the demography, if demography is politics, then that demography is a very positive thing. We can be proud of the resiliency and good sense of women voters who, frankly, had a tough year. Many of them adopted Hillary Clinton as their standard bearer and had to take that tough loss. And then they turned around and they were offered this little enticement of this woman on the ticket, and they had the good sense to say, that's not me. I'm not that. I mean, are you serious? But apparently the Republican Party thought that they didn't have that good sense, and yet they voted in huge numbers. So there still is a gender gap. It's mostly a white gender gap because white men are kind of laggard on this stuff, but the black and brown communities seem to have a bit more sense about this across the gender lines. We just elected a candidate who was smart enough to stand up and oppose the war before it started. And since, you know, United for Peace and Justice started in this room, well, actually it was a room across town, but it was still IPS, that's pretty profound. That's a good thing. And insofar as he's disappointed as a senator, let's not give up the political turf that the reason Barack Obama is president was because he opposed that war. That's why he defeated Hillary Clinton in the primaries. And everyone who voted Tuesday knew that he was against the war because McCain kept bringing up the surge over and over. And Obama kept saying, yeah, but you were for the war in the first place, and I was against it. It was his #1 example of his good judgment, which I happen to agree it was good judgment. And apparently most voters agreed too. That's political turf that the anti-war movement doesn't normally get. We should hang on to that even when we're frustrated with him about the military budget in the future. We just elected a candidate whose first political act was an anti-apartheid speech in college a quarter of a century ago. That's a good thing. That means somebody somewhere recognized his potential 25 years ago when he was just a student at Occidental and asked him to give a speech, and a career was launched. And now he's president of the United States. We can be proud of the slow but true maturity of white people in America. Granted, we're a little slower than most races, but we're getting there. And I want to say something here, because this is something where we can be proud of the labor unions of America. James Carville had a funny line, which he used years ago, which is that Pennsylvania's like Philadelphia and Pittsburgh with Alabama in between. That's not true. It's a funny line, but it's not true. And the reason it's not true is because of the labor unions of America. And if you don't believe me, go check the returns on Tuesday from central Pennsylvania compared to Alabama, where white people are still lost in the death grip of the Confederacy, for crying out loud. It's like, get over it, guys. It's over. But in places where we have labor unions, they were able to give reasons for voters to overcome their racial fears. And we owe our labor union brothers and sisters thanks for that, because that was pretty profound. We can actually be proud of most Americans, except at Sarah Palin rallies. They actually seem to have accepted the ascendance of a black guy with a funny name to the White House with either euphoria or calm. I mean, knock on wood, right? There's always some fear out there, but this wouldn't necessarily have been predicted 20 years ago. We can take pride in the victory of a community organizer against Republican ridicule, which turned out to rally all the community organizers all over the country, and we turned out more votes. We can be proud of our internet organizing. the invention of small dollar internet giving, which our side has done better than anybody else, which essentially, it doesn't mean Barack Obama's always going to do the right thing, but it now means he doesn't actually have to care what his big donors did. He doesn't need them. He's got this incredible network of small donors. We've created a system where we can fight back, where when they smear him, we can fight back. The internet has given us a way to fight, to organize, and we're getting pretty good at it, and we can be happy with that. And that happened on our side. We can be proud that the old culture war scare tactics failed. I mean, socialism didn't even scare anybody. A scary black preacher on TV all the time apparently didn't scare very many people. When I talked to people in the Rainbow Coalition 2 years ago, they were nervous about Jeremiah Wright effect on Obama. And they had a right to be nervous, but apparently Obama was able to push through that, and which I find pretty interesting. Obama carried the Northeast by 20 points, the Midwest by 10, the West by 10. He lost the South by 20. And since every black in the South just about voted for him, that means that's the weak point for the nation is white Southerners, but that's also a huge problem for the Republican Party, where now almost half of their U.S. senators are Southerners. I mean, they are trapped in their little cul-de-sac in the white, culturally fearful South, and they're going to have a hard time getting out of that, which is a good thing politically. And I think we can be proud of the fact that the winning candidate was identified with universal health care, with a timeline to end the war in Iraq with 16 months, with an alternative energy program for green jobs that he said he was going to put $150 billion into, the protection of Social Security, the Economic Free Choice Act. He was explicit about those things, and they couldn't defeat him. In fact, not only could they defeat him, that 53% and climbing that Barack has, and as they keep counting the West Coast absentee ballots, it keeps creeping up. That's the third highest percentage that any Democrat's ever gotten. Only 2 Democrats have done better. FDR 3 times, maybe 4, and Lyndon Johnson. So Barack Obama, and that landslide is about the same as the 2 that Clinton got. Not to mention that it really made the map look much nicer with all that extra blue in it. That was good. But that 53%, Democrats don't get majorities. Carter barely did. Clinton never did. Truman didn't. JFK didn't. Woodrow Wilson, they don't get majorities. Obama got 53% and climbing. That's huge, in my opinion. It's a big deal for a Democrat. We can be proud of that. And he was explicit about what he was for most of the time when he did it. So the bottom line here is I'm going to savor this. I encourage you to. I know there'll be disappointments later on, but there'll be time for that later. And to me, I guess I'll conclude with, to me this campaign was, the whole thing was like a great book that you're reading. And you have that weird feeling where you want to hurry up and see what happens, but you also don't want it to end, which of course is a paradox that you can't get through. And you love every page. I don't know, I remember that when I read Man's Hope or Grapes of Wrath or any of Marge Piercy's great novels, and I couldn't put them down. And at the end of it, I thought, God, that was so good. And I was happy, sad that I was done. And that's the way this campaign is. This campaign has been like a great novel about America. And it had a happy ending Tuesday. It was a good ending. And it was because of the work that progressives in the past and some of us in this room did on things that we care about, and we should not let that go. So thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Steve. And finally, it's my great pleasure to introduce our last panelist, Bill Fletcher Jr. Bill is the Director of Field Services and Education for the American Federation of Government Employees. He has also served as the executive editor of blackcommentator.com. Prior to joining AFGE, Bill was the Bell Zeller visiting professor at Brooklyn College, City University of New York. From January 2002 Through April 2006, he served as the president and chief executive officer of Trans-Africa Forum, a national nonprofit organization organizing, educating, and advocating for policies in favor of the peoples of Africa, the Caribbean, and Latin America. We are also pleased and proud to call Bill Fletcher Jr. a senior scholar of the Institute for Policy Studies. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you. First, good afternoon. And I want to thank IPS for putting this together. And I need to give a very important disclaimer that what I'm about to say does not reflect the views of my employer, the American Federation of Government Employees. The theme of my remarks is 24, and not the television show. Prior to the election, in different talks that I would give, people would say, well, how much of a honeymoon period should there be for Obama? And I said there absolutely needs to be a very adequate honeymoon period, and we should give him 24 hours. and so the 24 hours, in my opinion, are up. But I want to first speak to the first 24 hours. Like many other African Americans, my stomach was in absolute knots on the evening of November 4th, not knowing what was going to happen. I don't trust the white electorate, and I didn't believe the polls. So I didn't know what exactly was going to happen. And when I was actually in the process of being interviewed, and the results are coming in, and see, what you got to understand is that on election night, I go to sleep, right? I don't watch the returns. To me, it's too nerve-wracking, right? I just go to sleep, and I say, I'm going to wake up the next morning and see what happens, right? But this evening, I was compelled to. And I was watching this, and with absolute disbelief. I made a point of not sending in an absentee ballot, but standing in line. And as I just recently wrote in something, I had to have the experience of touching the machine. Doing the ballot thing just wasn't going to work. I had to go in there. I had to stand 2.5 hours in line with hundreds of other African Americans, get there and touch that machine and just grin like a Cheshire cat. And so when this unfolded, I was in utter disbelief. And like many other people I've talked to, I danced around the house, and I can't dance. I cried. I screamed. I got on the phone and called many of my closest friends and comrades and called my parents, my daughter, and we all screamed together because it was just such an unbelievable moment, and I'm not going to lose that moment. So don't worry. However, the clock has struck and those 24 hours are gone. And now we have to face some real challenges, it seems to me. So we have to begin with understanding that, and for this audience, this is obvious, that this man is not a savior. Now, I say that because in many other audiences, he is. And this becomes very important at the level of political work when we're talking about holding him accountable, that particularly among African Americans, there's going to be an incredible amount of defensiveness for Obama for quite some time. This is, the historic importance of this election can't be overstated. And for that reason, there'll be many people that will watch things happen that they do not agree with, but are going to be very silent, and they're going to be upset with those of us that raise criticisms. And that has to be factored in when we're going forward. It should not mean that we're silent, but it means that many of us are going to catch hell. And many of us are going to be hit with the idea that we should extend a longer honeymoon period to let things come into place, let Obama work some things out. But my argument is that while we have been screaming with joy, some other people have been planning. And there's some things that we should watch that I think are a bit unsettling. John Podesta being the head of the Transition Committee and Emmanuel being asked to be the Chief of Staff, and rumors about Larry Summers being considered for Treasury Secretary do not make me feel that warm and fuzzy feeling. You know, what it starts to feel like then is a Clinton retread. And there are those that have said, well, Bill, wait a minute, calm down. He may be just doing this to appease the Clintons, and then after a while he'll bring certain things together. And that may be true, but I don't bet on that. And I don't bet on that because Obama's platform in running, and this is one of the reasons I was a critical supporter of his. I was not an Obama fanatic. Obama's platform was ambiguous on a number of things. And I think that what we should understand is that the mandate that he's received, and I do think I differ with Ralph Nader on this, he did receive a mandate, but the mandate is vague. The mandate is twofold. One is that there needs to be an immediate response to the economic crisis that needs to be focused on the needs of Main Street, so-called, of regular people. I think that's one part of the mandate. The other part of the mandate is on foreign policy, which is that something needs to be done so that the United States isn't hated around the world the way that it is. Now, these are vague, and you could send a battleship through those, but they nevertheless do indicate that the idea of change was not just change in general. People are looking for something very important that represents a different direction than either the Bushes or the Clinton direction. In order for us to respond to this moment, we have to be careful. John mentioned in the beginning about the Roosevelt era. And many people have talked about how we should look at the Roosevelt era and draw important lessons about how someone that's elected who is so-so can end up doing some marvelous things. And that's absolutely true. And it's interesting because Roosevelt, when he designed a New Deal, was modeling it after the corporate state of fascist Italy initially. And even with that modeling, the extreme right in the United States thought he was going too far, which was amazing. But what was it that pushed Roosevelt? It wasn't just the labor movement. It was that there was a left, and the left pushed the labor movement. So it's not just that there was that Roosevelt needed a new alliance, which he obviously did, but that there was a left. And the left wasn't just an abstraction. It wasn't just people talking. There were political organizations that were very well rooted, that were directly responsible for helping to move things. These were not lobbies. These were organizations that had roots in factories, in workplaces around the country, in communities, and were linked up with other social movements. This was a left that helped to bring together the vision and create a certain kind of narrative to which Roosevelt had to respond. We exist right now with a very weak left. I'm not one that argues we don't have one. I do think we have one, but it's very weak. And it will not get any stronger unless we pay attention to questions of organization. You know, that you don't get power based on magic and goodwill. And that relates to a second piece, which is that while left and progressive people were very involved in the Obama campaign, this was very different than, let's say, the Jackson campaigns of '84 and '88, where the left was actually quite central in both '84 and '88. In this campaign, what was interesting was that that there was a role for individual left and progressive people, but the folks at the top were clearly not of the left, and they would not, in my opinion, I would not argue that they were progressive. They're basically liberals. It's a different dynamic. And so it seems to me that we have to understand that while we may have a complicated alliance with these folks, they're not us, right? They're not the enemy, but they're not us. And that if we're going to see things happen, we're going to have to push. We're going to have to push really hard. Otherwise, we're going to be set up for a lot of disappointments. Also related to questions of organization and challenge is that there is now a grave danger, and I'm sorry to be putting a cloud over this, but like as I said before, the 24 hours have passed, right? Let's get real. No, I know, I hear you. There's a tendency that I'm already detecting to sort of mythologize the Obama campaign, and I'm not referring to anything that's been said on the panel. There's this myth that the Obama campaign was a campaign of volunteers, and I had to point out to somebody in an interview the other day, this is the most expensive campaign in U.S. history that had staff people, full-time paid staff people that helped to move this thing along. This was not a campaign, a spontaneous eruption of regular people who started getting to their computers and sending emails and putting up stuff, right? There was organization here. And I say that just so we not fall into illusions. If we're going to contest for power, we need organization. And that means dollars. It won't run on magic and goodwill, right? It means that we've got to build organization and we've got to be prepared to go up against these folks. My final point, that while I think that Steve was absolutely right in terms of everything that he said, as always, the 46% that McCain gained was more than 55 million people, right? So we're not talking about, a 75-25 split, or we're not talking about there's a few thousand or even a million people running around who are nutcases, right? We're talking about 55 million people who, despite a profound economic crisis, despite 2 wars that are kicking the ass of the United States, destroying the economy, not to mention destroying the lives of the people of those countries, right? 55 million people were prepared to vote with their fears and vote based on irrationalism. Okay, this means that there is a base that's out there, a complicated base, but a base that we're going to have to pay attention to, and I don't mean simply from the standpoint of trying to win them over. What I mean is that we must expect what was once called revanchism, that is revenge. We must expect right-wing populism, right? We must expect that there's going to be a great deal of anger out there among a section of white people that we're going to have to deal with. And right-wing populism, along with left-wing populist approaches, thrive in periods of economic crisis. The strength of right-wing populism is that it more or less corresponds to the dominant narrative in this country. The dominant narrative being, if you work hard, parenthesis, and you're white, your lives and the lives of your children will be better than in the past. For white people around this country, they feel betrayed. And they're looking for who was their betrayer. Was it the Jew? In every every financial crisis, the right wing is always looking for the Jew. Every financial crisis. And they're looking now, right? Is it the immigrant? Is it the African American, right? Is it the gay and lesbian, right? Who is the source of this? Who is the betrayer of the American dream? We're going to have to build a counter politics that's prepared to go up against this and not assume that simply on the basis of a very significant victory we had on November 4th, that people are running around chasing their tails or that they're in complete dismay. Because I would put $1 to a donut that there's strategy sessions going on right now by the right to figure out how they rebuild, and rebuild in one of 2 ways where, and I think Krugman's right, there could very well be a split. There's the corporate right within the Republican Party, which could essentially collapse and move into the Democratic Party, which raises a whole series of interesting questions. And then you have the Palins, the right-wing populists, who may in fact end up becoming the hegemonic force within the Republican Party. The Republican Party contracts but becomes a voice of the extreme right. We have to be prepared for this, and it means organization. We should not fall prey, I know my time is up, we should not fall prey to the demobilization that happened in '92. We should not fall prey to what I saw in the labor movement where people said, our friend is in the White House, we can't challenge him, right? We've got to challenge because the other side already is. Thank you.